Chapter 4. 5 Definitions. Ontology. Ontology is what epistemology is all about. Its concern is the being of all existence. It is more than a science of analysis or inquiry. It is the art and science of determining the potentiality of all existence. In the process of intellection, the mind works toward a comprehension of being. This is the learning process. In its movement toward comprehension, the mind brings to this process the objectified knowns which are possibly related to the object. To comprehend is to structure objectively the parts in relation to one another to form the whole of being. To relate parts and parts to the whole is to determine the potentiality inherent in parts as well as in the whole. The mind is able to know being because it is transparent. It stands ready to reveal its essence when the mind is able to comprehend its form. Being is a totality of essence. It is what exists. The task of the mind is to objectify its essence. In this way, the mind learns why being exists. Essence and its meaning comprise being. The potential of what exists depends upon the mind and its power of comprehension. This power of comprehension is the prime transcendent factor in the intellective process. We must not forget that Kant raises his voice and demands to be heard the moment we introduce the transcendent factor into the argument. He raises the question, how are a priori synthetic judgments possible? While not in direct answer to this question, your response is this. Ontology is more than the science of philosophizing transcendentally. This is evident from our discussion above. But Heidegger discusses Kant's position by saying that when Kant wishes to characterize the problematic of traditional ontology, he makes use of the expression transcendental philosophy to denote the subject matter of metaphysical generalities or ontologia. And this is why, in mentioning this traditional ontology, he speaks of the transcendental philosophy of the ancients. The problematic of which he speaks is the possibility of ontology being considered a problem. We have mentioned the transparent factor in ontology. It is an important concern if we are to understand the implicative values inherent in ontology and its responsibility in the process of intellection. We must structure this force more thoroughly. What makes ontology possible? The transparency factor. Essence possesses structure. To know essence is the ability to visualize the structural components of its being. Being comprises totality. To know essence is to determine the design of all constructs used in its formulation. In this way, the structure of ontology becomes apparent by means of its visibility. No true learning takes place without this component in the intellective process. Metaphysics. Metaphysics is the science of contemplation. It uses reason to transcend reason. It is the mind of the process of intellection. Its task is to design the perspective of experience. Its basic contention is the belief that experience-free knowledge is an impossibility. All of this is another way of saying that the mind is not a receptor of knowledge. What is being suggested is this. As the mind functions, it recognizes its responsibility to the intuitive being which characterizes the ontological structure of its cognitive process. To meet this responsibility, the mind is constantly developing its powers of creativity, and it does this by means of the intuitive factors present in comprehension. It is correct to say, then, that metaphysics provides the implementation for the evolvement of value to be determined in the relationship between subject and object as this relationship develops synthetically from the experience of mind functioning through its empirical processes. Truth resides not in representations, but in the ability of the mind to apprehend its relative values. Truth is absolute, but its applicative values are relative. By degrees of apprehension, the mind must participate in the development of the criteria of truth and their points of origination. It is these criteria which holds the greatest interest for the science of metaphysics. The criteria of truth is first to be found in the material of knowledge, the object of the mind. Truth is being, which makes truth is its criterion. To apprehend truth and its essence, the mind must function as directed by the leads inherent in the criteria. This is the internalization procedure, which is an integral part of the process of intellection. Only through the operation of this process is it possible for the criteria of truth to be applied in the subject or mind. Descartes did not go far enough when he suggested changing the object into the subject's representation. Metaphysics is a science which makes it possible for the truth inherent in the object to be realized in its essence by the mind. It is the mind which universalizes the particulars of an object. Metaphysics enables the mind to experience the material of knowledge and its meaning. This is a cognitive experience, as all experience is, analytically based on empirical methodology. To experience is to have found meaning. Meaning is realized when relationships are validated through a verification of causal connections. Here is the thrust of an empirical methodology. It is metaphysics which provides the procedural lubricant, making it possible for the mind to function by means of its empirical perspective. A fact is not a fact until those factors which make it a fact are determined. Until this happens, a fact is but a proposition, awaiting validation and verification. It is this transitional process which is dependent upon metaphysics for its direction. Direction suggests potentiality, and potentiality suggests positivity, both of which are ingredients in the becoming process of interest to metaphysics. Potency is the ascendancy factor in potentiality. Those factors which determine positivity, however, make it possible for the mind to move in the direction logically determined by validated method. Combine potentiality and positivity, and you have the perspective of comprehension. To comprehend is to perceive what is becoming in the learning process, and what can become possible as being in action. Here is the science of metaphysics at work. It is a transcendental philosophy of methodology according to Kant's way of thinking. It concerns itself with totalities as universals. Here is the whole question of ontology: what is possible for man to know and to comprehend? Is there a difference between knowing and comprehension, and if so, why and in what ways? These are questions which can be answered only by being conscious of the working premise of metaphysics. For the mind to function, it must rely on first principles, those which make it possible to comprehend the material of knowledge. Cause is oneness. It is the only means possible for the integration and unification of human knowledge. All being possesses cause. To determine its first principles is to discover its potentiality and the positivity of its presuppositions. All thought evolves from presupposition. However, while thought evolves from presupposition, it is a metaphysical thought which must analyze them and validate their a priori conditions. Metaphysics is that process of the mind which enables experience to transcend itself. That is, it qualifies experience for the process of experience its own conditions. These conditions are the primary qualities of reality. Qualities alone make it possible for an object to be known. Thus, while they are a priori, it requires an empirical technique to discover their meaning. Qualities comprise the content of every object. Reality is the matter of first principles. The qualities of the content of reality serve as the source of intention, realizable only by the means of the inferential directives found in every concept. The concept is the working arm of the transcendental nature of the process of intellection. The foundations of metaphysics. In one sense, metaphysics has a number of foundations upon which it builds its science of knowing. Strictly speaking, it has only one foundation, that is, being. It was suggested above that the metaphysic forces the mind to concern itself with its own powers and potentiality. These questions loom large when the mind is confronted by its content. The moment the mind is concerned with potentiality, it is thinking in terms of ultimates. Thus we have the chief of ontological problems, that of being. Metaphysics is based on the primary qualities of being. Metaphysics analyzes being as being. To make this analysis, the mind must examine the object in its relationship to the subject, that is, what potentialities are suggested by the object for consideration by the mind. This process is referred to by Kant. He alludes to it as the activity of our inner nature. All experience comprises sensate reactions intellectually based on attributes of being. This is to say, the senses are empirical, to take a position opposite to that of Kant. Nothing can be imposed upon being. Being imposes itself upon the self. Being confronts itself. To do this, it intellectualizes its qualities as the embodiment of its content. This comprises the data of sensations. Kant seems to think this is a difficult task. He says that it demands a reader resolved to think himself gradually into a system, which is grounded in nothing regarded as given except pure reason itself, and thus tries to develop knowledge out of its original seeds without seeking the support of any fact. The problem here is that being is supported by fact. Without fact, being cannot exist. Without being, fact does not exist. Here is the crux of the ontological problem in epistemology. What takes place when we experience meaning is the comprehension of the material of knowledge. What takes place is a correlation of facts, in accordance with their nature, unifying existence and essence. Metaphysics and the traits of existence. Metaphysics is the vehicle whereby existence experiences its own potential. Qualities possess traits, and metaphysics is primarily interested in the point of origination of each trait. Traits which characterize content make it possible for the mind to experience itself in one sense, provides structure for existence, thereby language for the mind. It is the trait which equates content and essence. It possesses the potential for value. This is to remind the learner that all being is empirically rooted by means of its content, and that value exists only as it evolves from that same being. To think, there must be something to think about. These are ideas learned from ideas, and this is the thought process. It is the mind at work on something. Because it is something, it has content, and the mind analyzes content by its traits and their presuppositions. All of this is an intellectual experience. For the mind to experience, it must first experience itself and the truth which it possesses, even though it may still be in the form of assumptions. It is a movement toward certitude, basing its methodology upon presupposed knowns. Truth is a trait of existence. It is truth which constantly purifies the process of intellection, as well as projecting the will as a determinant in the learning process. The will supplies the mind with its power to think. This was of vital concern to Aristotle. It was a developmental thing for him. Just how do we react to a confrontation? What use do we make of it? This is giving power to thought. His familiar words remind us that we should be grateful not only to those whose views we may agree, but also to those who have expressed more superficial views, for those also contributed something by developing before us the power of thought. Truth is metaphysical in nature. It is truth which provides a unity of all existence. It is truth which possesses the traits which reveal cause and its potentiality for becoming known. It is mind and its will which provides the process for the discovery of truth. Truth is the realization of intention couched in every existent. The mind of metaphysics. Kant was most astute when he insisted that the thought process is dependent upon both metaphysical and empirical means. He failed to take into account, however, that the fact that it is impossible to make a fine distinction between these means. When he says that the empirical factors are presented to the mind and the metaphysical factors appear in the course of mental activity, the dichotomy between the two seemingly disappear when considered from the point of view of their interdependent factors. The paradoxical disease sets in when we recall that Kant denied to metaphysics the character of science, because for him experience was the product and the terminus of science, since science built it by applying to sensible data necessities which are pure forms of the mind. One wonders if this same confusion was not experienced by Whitehead when discussing the metaphysics of reality. He said that its scope embraces both perceiver and perceived. All is well up to this point, but then he goes on by saying that no perplexity concerning the object of knowledge can be solved by saying that there is a mind knowing it. Nor is this problem to be solved by making substitutions as Comte would have us believe. His positivism required us to substitute science for metaphysics. The question he neglected to raise was this: how is content, the material of knowledge, to be received, if not by the mind? Being is received by being. Here the mental and material factors unite. This is the process of intellection. Metaphysics, science, and experience. Metaphysics is concerned with existence, therefore, with what is real. Reality is opened by the mind and investigated by the methodology structured by its metaphysical perspective. Metaphysics recognizes the existence of the Absolute as cause of all being. Appearance serves as but a confrontation to the mind. Appearance bespeaks externals which must be subjected to the process of intellection to determine the nature of its reality. The mind must determine, therefore, ascertain the validity of the natural premises upon which appearance is based. The highest and most sophisticated science of the natural order is metaphysics, according to St. Thomas. There is nothing more real than the natural order. The starting point of science is experience. To experience is to comprehend reality. Without the metaphysical components of experience, science as methodology cannot function. This position can be documented when it is remembered that science functions methodologically through its assumptions pertaining to universals and particulars. Abstract universals require the experience inherent in intuition for their analysis. Concrete universals require the experience inherent in intuition for their analysis. The difference, then, the same question can be raised about particulars. Science raises this question about metaphysics. What is the object of metaphysics? Is it the universal, the particular, or is it, as we suggest, the point of origination as cause in both universals and particulars? The universal as transcendental is found in every particular. The object of metaphysics is the experienced substance of the trait of reality. Since experience is empirically based and functions according to its methodology, its material of knowledge serves as the assumption of science. Universals and particulars possess the potentiality for functional usage. It is the business of science to render these forces functional in the human mind. Existence is that which is universal and particular. It is an intelligible universe of mind identified together with content. Truth as cause is identical with existence, but only in its form of potentiality, awaiting the process of experience by the mind. The mind as being examines its object as being in terms of the assumption and potentiality of being. There is a logic in all of this. It is the logic of the scientific method. It demands a type of thinking based on reflective thought and structured according to the directives inherent in the science of perception. Its task is to formulate the criteria of reality. In this way, metaphysics is not to be considered an end, but a means intimately related to method. Mind itself is means, the operant of cause. All truth as cause is dependent upon the science of metaphysics for its comprehension. Rationalism. Rationalism has its epistemological foundation in experience. Its goal is to determine the nature of reality. It toys with the a priori because there is the realization that in essence is found the true base of metaphysical existence. Rationalization is a concept to be reckoned with in the theory of knowledge because it tells us that no learning takes place until the mind has learned to conceptualize its objects. This stance again raises the question of experience and its relationship to knowing. Is it possible to possess knowledge independent of experience? Kant says yes, and he points to mathematics as an example. Does this suggest that mathematics is the model of an a priori knowledge? Is this what pure rationalism is telling us? How different is all this from Cartesian rationalism? Both Kant and Descartes show concern for certainty in knowledge. As stated above, Kant pointed to mathematics as that subject which carries with it apodictic certainty. Here, he says, is an example of absolute necessity, not based on experience and consequently a pure product of reason. The question we ask is this: is it possible to reason without experiencing the product of reason? Certainty is the realization of truth. To find meaning in truth is to know its essence, therefore certain of its existence. As one reasons, one experiences. Does this mean that Kant refuted rationalism? Or was it the metaphysical base of experience which he refuted? Popper discusses this problem. using Hegel to develop his argument. He asks, how did Hegel overcome Kant's refutation of rationalism? He answers very easily, by holding that contradictions do not matter. They just have to occur in the development of thought and reason. They only show the insufficiency of a theory which does not take account of the fact that thought, that is reason, and with it, according to the philosophy of identity, reality is not something fixed once and for all, but is developing. We live in a world of evolution, he says. Kant, says Hegel, refuted metaphysics, not rationalism. Popper continues, what Hegel called metaphysics, he says, as opposed to dialectic, is only such a rationalistic system as does not take into account of evolution, motion, development, and thus tries to conceive of reality as something stable, unmoved, and free of contradiction. Hegel, with his philosophy of identity, infers that since reason develops, the world must develop, and since the development of thought or reason is a dialectic one, the world must also develop in dialectic triads. There are innumerable problems raised for rationalism in the two preceding paragraphs, and which we have no intention of discussing here. But there is one problem which is impossible to bypass. The essence of rationalism is the reasoning process. Again, we ask, is it possible to reason without experiencing its essence? To reason is to verify and confirm truth. Since experiencing is finding truth by means of its evidence, it includes what Kant and Hegel are insisting on, namely, not only is it necessary, in order to possess knowledge, to know what the object is, but how we must reason as well. The relevancy of a reasonable meaning is what true rationality is all about. Rationalism gives support to its reason, for within its reason resides its explanation. We must remember that it is the mind which reasons, and is able to do so because it has carefully structured the epistemological question, and which proffers explanation based on validated evidence. Phenomenalism. There is one page in the history of phenomenalism which suggests a basic inconsistency. Lewis refers to it in this way. As the history of phenomenalism serves to illustrate, conceptual knowledge may be valid provided only there is order in experience, if experience is lawful, quite without reference to any further question. The problem is not whether there is order in experience. This is the responsibility of the mind. When the mind experiences, it finds meaning. Meaning is a resultant of the order in experience. The problem lies in the referential quality of the relationship. For the mind to experience, it must experience something. Reference implies a relationship between things. The relationship of what I speak is this. There is a tendency to suggest by phenomenologists that Humerean ideas and impressions are of such a nature that they take their stand between the knower and the things or object to be known. Dewey raises his voice and tells us this position will have plenty of support as long as sensations and ideas are supposed to be valid, only when they report to mind something prior to them. Ayer responds to this by saying that the phenomenalist need not deny that the manner in which sense data occur can be explained in terms of entities which are not themselves observable. He will, however, add that to talk about such unobservable entities is, in the end, to talk about sense data. The question we must raise is whether or not the phenomenalist is not running head-on into a multitude of new problems when he holds the sense data exist only when perceived, and that physical objects can exist only without being perceived. Perhaps this is but another way of repeating the dicta of Ayer without falling prey to the problem of entities. Our problem here is with respect to the meaning of observation and perception. Kohler insists that in observation, quite apart from any theory, there is a dualism between percepts and their outer causes. And he says it is hard to interpret these and their outer causes, and it is hard to interpret these outer causes as though again they were merely percepts. In keeping with this position, Ayer refers us to Plato's myth, the shadow on the wall of the cave, which are all that prisoners can see. These are contrasted with substantial objects outside. Ayer raises the question, perhaps phenomenalism leaves us with nothing but the shadows. But the mind itself isn't satisfied with shadows. What does the mind perceive and why? Is the what of perception only an object? Is it possible to be means as well? Kant would have us believe that the real is not knowable in itself. The real does not inform thought, rather thought informs the datum. Are data, essence, and ideas, as well as impressions, only means for knowing, not its objects? Here's a paradox. Dewey believes that as long as they are regarded as merely mental means, rather than as means which, through overt acts, effectual actual redisposition of antecedent things, the retort will have the character of an arbitrary tour de force. It will be a pious doctrine rather than a conclusion empirically verified. We subject the above statement to the problem question raised. Would data or ideas, without being perceived, be true without benefit of observation? Does not perception intend to concern itself with the conditions of truth and the conscious factor in experience? If so, where does this leave phenomenalism in the epistemological scheme of things? Phenomenology is the philosophy of experience which asks the question, what is the essence of existence? And what is the nature of the power used by the concept to justify its own process of analysis? These questions serve as the pivot of the mind's conscious activity in determining the potentiality of being for the purpose of uniting meaning and experience. End of chapter.